Part 28. I Can See the Laws of Things. Author, Yitiao Xuanhuan. Chapter 271. Lin En walked to the black hole and saw streams of black blood pouring out of it. At the same time, countless old god spores spread in the space and spread out to the distance. Lin En, who saw the scene that looked like the abyss of purgatory, couldn't help but feel heavy in his heart. There was a chill in his tone. His purple eyes looked at the bottomless black hole and said word by word, "Old God, your erosion of this world. Has it started now?" After saying that, Lin En took a step forward and entered the bottomless black hole. And when Lin En entered the black hole, the whole world was in chaos. Eastern city of the land of the rising sun. In a speeding train, a middle-aged man was sitting on a seat, holding a mobile phone and reading the news. Suddenly he stood up from his seat, raised his hand and grabbed another person's shoulder. The whole head split open from the middle, and several black tentacles stretched out from the cracks of the head, piercing the head of this person and completely occupying the body of this person. The train fell into chaos in an instant, and the people twisted by the old gods began to erode this world. Mutations also broke out in Xuanhuan City, Zhuzhu Domain. A large number of twisters began to attack others. But at the first moment, the guards of Xuanhuan City began to act, and they fought against these twisters with all their strength. Corpses fell one by one, and tentacles were destroyed one by one, as if the battle would never end. Killing, blood, and death have become the common theme of the world today. The people of Zhuzhu Domain, under the arrangement of the defense force, all locked the doors, closed the windows, drew the curtains, and stayed at home to avoid the disaster. They watched everything outside on TV. After Lin En became the leader of Zhuzhu Domain united as one and made great progress in all aspects. The TV stations collectively broadcast the same channel, and Chen Daoming's face appeared on the TV. His face was heavy, and his tone was even more serious. "Please stay at home, residents, we will eliminate these monsters, please believe us. Lin En has gone to the source of all this. When Lin En returns, all this will end." Many people who were in front of the TV, with horrified faces and panic in their hearts, heard Chen Daoming talking about Lin En. One by one, they actually calmed down, as if a dose of tranquilizer was injected into their hearts. At this moment, the people clenched their fists, and their eyes became more determined. They all couldn't help but whispered, "Yes, we must stay calm, as long as Lord Lin En is here, we will be fine. I believe in Lord Lin En, Lord Lin En will never abandon us. Lord Lin En is my male god, he is the best and the best, he will definitely save us again." Chen Daoming's words quickly spread to all parts of the world through the internet. All those who heard these words no longer had any fear or rejection of Lin En. All that was left was respect and admiration. They were also waiting for Lin En's return, because they knew very well that Lin En was the strongest person in the world. At this moment, their lives were tied to Lin En. Words composed of different languages echoed all over the world. "Lord Lin En, please be our savior. Go to God, I only believe in Lord Lin En now." This situation was something Lin En had never expected. The people of the world who had always been disunited had a common belief at this moment. At this time, Lin En, who jumped into the black hole from the outside world, was accelerating forward. In this short period of time, he had already dived hundreds of kilometers underground. In this black hole, there was a stronger evil and cold feeling than the outside world, which belonged to the old gods. Like a deep cave cold pool that had been frozen for hundreds of years. As Lin En continued to go deeper underground, the evil and cold feeling became more intense. Even when Lin En reached 2,000 kilometers, this ominous feeling was about to become a physical entity. And when Lin En arrived here, the old god who had not stopped him finally got the chance to attack. The old god was hiding in the deepest part of the black hole, and Lin En had come to a place where it could reach. In the darkness, countless vertical eyes began to focus their sights on Lin En. A series of hoarse whispers began to sound beside Lin En's ears. Damn, damn, damn guy. I'm going to kill you. Lin En's purple eyes looked at the nothingness below in this dark environment. In this endless darkness, he saw an indescribable shape. Only two words emerged in Lin En's mind. Weird. He said in a very cold tone. Just you. The so-called gods of the old times. They are just a group of guys eliminated by the times. The old god felt a strong provocation from Lin En's words. It was extremely furious and attacked Lin En directly. The next moment, the violent power of collapse appeared beside Lin En. This power of collapse instantly collapsed the space around Lin En. Countless spaces were broken, the empty world collapsed, and the airflow was emptied, and it became a dead and collapsed land. Any creature that entered this space would be completely swallowed up by this collapsed area in an instant. But Lin En was not affected at all in this collapsed environment. His purple pupils were still looking down, staring coldly at the monster with an indescribable appearance. As Lin En continued to descend into the black hole, a somewhat mocking arc appeared at the corner of his mouth. He spoke in a cold tone. It's just the power of collapse. You want to kill me? The next moment, a huge will slowly emerged in front of Lin En's chest. This was the will of heaven in his body. His expression became even more indifferent, and his two purple eyes also changed dramatically. Lin En's left eye was filled with divine light, and countless laws emerged in this eye. And the right eye was occupied by darkness, and a strong breath of destruction emanated from his right eye. The eye of heaven and the eye of collapse, one for creation, and the other for destruction. The old god crawling in the endless darkness also saw the changes in Lin En's eyes at this moment. Immediately, the body of the old god hidden in the darkness shook violently, and a whisper with a strong sense of surprise sounded in Lin En's ears again. How is it possible? Your eyes. Why, is there the power of collapse? I can see the laws of things. Author, Yitiao Xianyue. Chapter 272. The next moment, Lin En's eyes were filled with the power of collapse. He came into contact with the power of collapse controlled by the old god. Boom! In an instant, an explosion sounded like the annihilation of all things. Everything that came into contact with this force of collapse began to be destroyed. This power soon spread to where the old gods were in the deep darkness. The countless vertical eyes of the old god saw all the scenes of the black hole's collapse of nothingness. Its countless tentacles, which were originally lying softly on the ground, suddenly became tense and began to tremble uncontrollably. The countless vertical eyes that were originally filled with dark murderous intent could not help but show a hint of panic at this moment. The whispers resounded. Ming Ming Ming, just, human. How could there be such a strong, powerful, power of collapse? Lin En's face was indifferent, and his body was still slowly descending toward the bottom of the black hole. The two eyes, one purple and one black, looked at the dark light and shadow moving in the darkness below. The black hole is about to completely collapse. Old God, it's time for you to die too. The next moment after saying this, Lin En's heavenly eyes emitted a strong light. A scarlet thunderbolt that was 1,000 meters long and dozens of meters wide appeared in Lin's hand, with various elements wrapped around it. In the darkness in front of Lin, a space channel appeared. He directly threw the scarlet thunder wrapped with many elements into the torn space. The next moment, directly above the old god's head, the thunder spear appeared and pierced directly into the old god's body. Immediately, countless cracks appeared on the old god's body. Its countless pitch-black vertical eyes glared viciously at Lin, with unconcealable fear and astonishment hidden within them. Waves of death crises that it had never felt before rose up in its heart. The creepy whispers kept sounding, echoing back and forth in the black hole. Why? You still have the power to create. This cannot appear in the same being. There is actually this existence. Boom. The old god's body exploded into countless pieces. And at this moment, Lin An's body also passed through the space channel and came to the place where the old god's body exploded into countless pieces. His Honkai eye, which was as black as ink, exuded even stronger Honkai power. Boom. 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 The black hole collapsed completely, and the old god was swallowed by nothingness. Before it died, it only left a feeble whisper. It's useless, the world will collapse again. At some point, Lin was already standing outside the black hole. The two eyes slowly returned to normal. He listened to the old god's last whisper and chuckled. The world just collapsed. Of course I'll stop it. Thinking of Lin An here, he prepared to return to Zhu territory to take a look. But at this moment, his phone rang. After picking up the phone, Chen Daoming's extremely anxious voice was heard. Lin, your call finally got through. In the darkness where the old gods hide, electronic signals cannot reach them at all. Lin An asked calmly. Chen Daoming, what's the matter? Chen Daoming immediately replied. Something bad has happened. The old gods have begun to take action on this world. The world is in complete chaos, and many people have been twisted into tentacle monsters. Listening to Chen Daoming's anxious tone on the other end of the phone, Lin An couldn't help but feel a little heavier. He waved his hand gently, and a crack in space was torn open. At the same time, he returned to Chen Daoming through the phone. Wait for me, I'll be right back. After saying that, Lin hung up the phone and walked into the space crack. After running all the way, it took Lin An a full 2 minutes to get back to the outside of Jianghai City from this extremely remote place. The moment he returned here, Chen Daoming traveled through space and came to his side. Lin An asked directly. Chen Daoming, tell me the situation. Chen Daoming replied immediately without further greetings. Civilians have been hiding in their homes, and others are fighting against those monsters with all their strength. After telling Lin An all the situation, Chen Daoming spoke again. Lin, I guess, wants to completely deal with these monsters. The only way is to completely kill the old god. But it may be difficult to kill that old god. Thinking of the goosebumps and creepy feeling when he saw the old god in Kaidi's memory, Chen Daoming couldn't help but feel chills on his back. He knew very well in his heart how difficult it was to kill the old gods. Even Kaidi, who was stronger than him and became a demigod before him, became a slave of the old god after being attacked by the spores of the old god. Not to mention him, the guy who just became a demigod. Although he admitted that Lin An was very powerful, he did not think that Lin An and him could kill the old gods together. The old gods were gods after all. But just as he was thinking this in his heart, Lin An slowly shook his head at him. Then he heard Lin An's voice. It's useless. I have killed the old gods. Chen Daoming, who was originally preparing to say something, heard Lin An say this, and all the words he wanted to say were stuck in his throat. He wanted to say it but felt speechless. His eyes widened when he looked at Lin An, and his pupils were filled with full of surprise and shock. The whole person seemed to be stunned because he heard something that was impossible to happen. He looked at Lin An with a dull expression, and his breathing became heavy. Chen Daoming knew Lin An very well, and he knew that Lin An would not joke with him about this kind of thing. Lin An, his strength is so strong. Actually killed the old god. The gap between his and me is getting bigger and bigger. However, Chen Daoming was only stunned for a moment, and then he adjusted his state back. He asked in a heavy tone. The old god is dead. But this disaster, is it far from over? Lin An nodded gently, then raised his head and looked at the moon hanging over Jianghai City. The moon was no longer the same as before. The color turned scarlet and the size was magnified hundreds of times. Pools of black blood were flowing down from the moon. It looked very much like the black hole that Lin En had seen before. At this moment, Lin En had already concluded that there were other old gods on the moon. I just killed one old god. Only when all the old gods are killed can this change end completely. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. I can see the laws of things. Author, Xuanhuan. Chapter 273. While telling Chen Daoming about this, Lin En also entered the sky above Jianghai City. The moment he entered, he saw battles breaking out at various locations on the streets of the city. The whispers of the old gods are ringing everywhere. The faces of the people who were fighting the Twisted Ones were full of fear. Seeing this scene, Lin En snorted with a cold expression. Then he raised a hand toward the sky and said at the same time, "Thunder." The next moment, dark clouds gathered in the sky, and in an instant, the entire sky above Jianghai City was completely covered by thunder clouds. Boom! Thunder fell from the sky towards the ground, and the sky and the earth seemed to be connected by red threads. Every thunder and lightning strikes the twisters with incomparable precision, and those twisters will die without any resistance. The soldiers became stunned, and when they looked up they saw it. Lin's body was floating in mid-air, and countless scarlet thunder and lightning flashed past Lin. This looks like God is sending down divine punishment, God. Immediately, the fear and other negative emotions caused by the whispers of the old gods completely dissipated in the hearts of these warriors. Only the endless fanatical admiration for Lin En remained, and exciting shouts rang out. Great, Master Lin is here and we are saved. Master Lin En is so powerful. With just a wave of his hand, these damn monsters were completely killed. With Master Lin here, I don't feel afraid anymore. The shouts of these soldiers were also heard by the people hiding at home. They opened the windows one after another and looked at Lin En, who was floating in the air and looked extremely majestic under the light of thunder in the sky. The faces of the people who saw Lin En were filled with excitement, and they all felt a huge sense of peace of mind in their hearts, and there was no longer any panic. They all looked at Lin En with admiration, and they all wanted to dance on the spot. TV stations have also begun broadcasting to the entire Kyushu region. Lin's purple eyes looked down at the soldiers and people who were raising their heads and looking up at him. A faint smile appeared on his face, and he said loudly and softly, "Everyone, please stay at home. Just leave the disaster to us." The moment Lin En finished these two sentences, the people's shouts erupted like a raging ocean wave. "Sir Lin, we believe in you. If it were you, any miracle would happen. Come on, Master Lin, our whole family will always support you. Lord Lin, we must avenge our companions and get rid of those hateful monsters." Listening to the waves of shouts, Lin just nodded heavily. The next moment, he waved his hand again, and the thunder clouds in the sky dissipated, and his eyes turned to the moon, which was flowing with black blood and was closer to the world. "Old God, wait for me, I'll be here right away," Lin murmured in a low voice. At the same time, the space wheel appeared in the sky above Lin En's head, and the entire sky began to shake violently, and a huge space crack was torn open. Lin En's body also began to approach the crack in space. At this time, Chen Daoming also rushed to Lin En's side. He looked at Lin En approaching the crack in space and asked loudly and urgently, "Lin, where are you going?" After hearing Chen Daoming's words, Lin En turned around and looked at Chen Daoming lightly. He raised one hand and pointed at the scarlet moon, and put the other hand on his neck, making a wiping motion. At the same time, Lin En said in a very calm tone, "I'm going to kill the gods." After saying this, Lin En stepped into the space crack that he had just torn apart, and completely disappeared from the sky above Jianghai City. And at the moment Lin An said these words, everyone who heard these words subconsciously held their breath. Kill the god. They didn't even dare to think about this word. Chen Daoming raised his head and looked at the scarlet moon. When he heard Lin An's words, his pupils dilated many times in an instant. It is filled with a strong shock that cannot be erased. At this moment, Chen Daoming finally understood the gap between him and Lin An. He said with a sigh. Compared to Lin and I, we are really far behind. It's not just that the strength is far inferior to him. Even in terms of courage, there is a gulf-like gap. While sighing, Chen Daoming couldn't help shaking his head. Then it's just like you said before. I'll leave it to you to deal with the outside. As for the inside, I will handle it. Chen Daoming also left the Zhuzhu territory. He had already decided in his heart to clean up those scum who took the opportunity to harm the Zhuzhu territory at this critical moment. And after Lin An and Chen Daoming all left Jianghai City, the stunned people finally came to their senses. Their hearts have been completely overturned because of these 4 words from Lin An. Everyone clenched their fists and looked flushed. Damn it! Mr. Lin An is so awesome, he actually wants to kill a god. Only Mr. Lin An in this world can do such a thing. Master Lin, he is so handsome. I really want to marry him. This scene was also broadcast through the TV station. King Ian sat on the sofa and looked at Lin An's appearance on the TV. She couldn't help but hold the remote control tightly and said in a worried voice. Elder brother. You must come back safely. Ban Men, who was beside King Ian, stretched out his hand and patted King Ian's back, and said softly. King Ian, don't worry, Lin will be fine. King Ian raised her head, looked at Ban Men with 2 eyes, and asked with a stuttering tone due to worry. Really, really? Ban Men nodded heavily and said with a smile. Real. Because he is Lin. As long as it's Lin, there's absolutely no problem. King Ian's hand holding the remote control tightly slowly relaxed, and a bright smile slowly appeared on her face. She smiled and said. Ban Men, you're right. I should trust my brother. After Lin left, the picture broadcast by the TV station was focused on the red moon in the sky, flowing with black blood. At this moment, Lin An crossed the space rift and rose into the altitude of hundreds of thousands of meters. The air around him had become thin. Endless stars appeared in his sight, and the Milky Way seemed to be beside him. Under the influence of the sky roulette, Lin An can survive as usual even without oxygen. The closest thing to Lin is the moon. I can see the laws of things. Author, Yitiao Xianyue. Chapter 274. Lin An's purple eyes looked at the moon. At this moment, the moon was completely covered with black blood, not only the front of the moon, but also the dark side of the moon was covered with endless black blood. The evil and cold breath continued to radiate from the moon to the surrounding universe, and the scarlet moon seemed out of place in this universe. Sure enough, the lair of the old god is the moon. Now Lin An was completely sure that his guess was correct. Lin An approached the moon, and at the same time, the evil whisper of the old god sounded in Lin An's ears. The god of the new era. You, finally, came. Hearing the whisper of the old god in his ears, Lin An couldn't help but raise his eyebrows slightly. You knew I was coming. The old god replied. When you killed that part of me, I already knew it. Seeing that the old god had no intention of attacking him, Lin An decided not to do it for the time being. Who are you? Why do you want to invade our world? When Lin An asked these 2 questions, his tone was a bit cold. After a few seconds, the whisper of the old god answered Lin An's question. We are also earthlings like you. It's just that, the time period we existed, is tens of millions of years ago. We had a premonition, that the collapse of the world, is inevitable. And, there is only one way to survive, the collapse of the world. That is, to adapt to the collapse of the world, and transform into an old god in the collapse. Only then can you survive the collapse of the world. The old god can exist forever. Lin En listened to the whisper of the old god. He did not doubt the authenticity of this story, because there were already traces that showed that the old god was originally a product of the earth. After digesting the words of the old god, Lin En asked again. Since you have survived the collapse, then why do you want to extend your tentacles to the earth again? The black blood covering the surface of the moon rolled, and the tentacles squirmed. The whisper of the old god echoed in his tone. We are doing this for your own good. Only when everyone transforms into an old god can the world escape the fate of collapse. We had already planned for this tens of millions of years ago, and the moon was controlled by us at that time. Lin En was a little surprised that the purpose of the old god was like this, not to destroy the world, but to save the world. At this moment, the whisper of the old god sounded again. You are the god of the new era. You should lead those people to join us and assimilate with us. Escape the fate of the world's collapse. Only in this way can everyone live together forever. Lin En was not shaken by the words of the old god. He looked at the moon calmly and asked calmly, what are the consequences of doing this? Soon, the old god gave an answer. All assimilated people will have a unified will. They will become the same individual. After that, the old god became quiet, and countless vertical eyes appeared on the surface of the moon, staring at Lin En. They were waiting for Lin En's answer. Lin En's face became more and more indifferent. He would never agree to this invitation to lose self-awareness and become a puppet. He shook his head and replied with a somewhat cold tone. I refuse. Assimilating with you is no different from death. I will find other ways to resist the collapse of the world. The eyes in countless vertical eyes instantly became full of murderous intent, and the whispers of the old gods echoed. It seems that the negotiations have broken down. Then the only way is to kill you, this stumbling block. This whisper was once again filled with evil and gloomy. At this moment, Lin En felt a huge murderous intent from the scarlet moon. Instantly, the will of heaven in his body emerged from his chest. Lin En's eyes turned black and purple again. Let's do it. Those guys who are living in disgrace. Boom. The next moment, this huge moon broke away from the established orbit and crashed towards Lin En with a mighty force that seemed to collapse the sky and split the earth. In the universe, waves of voids were directly shattered. At the same time, countless tentacles waved in the dark space and slapped down towards Lin En. Boom. The floating objects in the space blocking the tentacles turned into powder directly. Lin En looked at the moon approaching him with a cold face. A space channel appeared in front of him, and he walked directly into it. Then, Lin En's body appeared several kilometers away. Lin En raised one hand, and a comet that was about the size of a country passing by him was wiped out by him and stopped suddenly. After the law of power was fully exerted, Lin En easily lifted the comet and smashed it towards the moon. Boom! The moon, which was approaching Lin En quickly, collided with the comet. The meteorite exploded into countless fragments, and the moon was also smashed back hundreds of kilometers, and a large number of tentacles were smashed into ashes. The shrill screams of the old gods echoed in the universe. After a few seconds, the screams stopped, and a huge pit appeared on the surface of the moon again. The vertical eyes densely covered on the moon looked at Lin En viciously, and the majestic killing intent burst out violently. The old god whispered, his tone filled with endless anger. As expected, the god of this era. Your power is really strong. Even millions of years ago, there was no such thing. Lin En stood thousands of miles away, sneered and said, times have changed. Don't use your old ideas to measure this world. Everyone on Earth saw the scene of the comet and the moon colliding just now. They looked at the red moon that had completely deviated from its orbit and was a little incomplete, and they all widened their eyes, feeling incredible in their hearts. All of them couldn't help but say in a lost voice, "Is this Lord Lin An fighting the enemy? So powerful, he can actually control meteorites. Too terrible, Lord Lin An's power has long exceeded imagination. Lord Lin An will definitely win. As long as Lord Lin An wins, we can be saved." Lin An's body approached the moon again. He took a step forward, and the next moment he appeared above the moon thousands of miles away. He clenched his fists tightly and blasted towards the moon. The old god looked at Lin An, controlled a large number of tentacles, and attacked Lin An's fists. I can see the laws of things. Author, Yitiao Xuanhuan. Chapter 275. In an instant, the millions of tentacles of the old god gathered together crazily, forming a huge tentacle like a pillar of heaven. Above Lin An's fists, the power of collapse and creation surrounded crazily. The next moment, the tentacles of the old god and Lin An's fists collided together. Boom! Countless vacuums were broken, and the violent noise spread rapidly. In the explosion, Lin An and the old god flew backwards in two completely different directions. Chen Daoming stood above a city, and countless corpses lay at his feet, and blood kept dripping down his arms. At this moment, he raised his head and looked at the scarlet moon in the sky, which was moving away from the earth at a speed beyond the speed of light. Immediately, Chen Daoming's pupils directly emerged with a look of surprise that could not be hidden at all. His drooping arms suddenly tightened up, and his hair stood up in the blood. Gurgle. His Adam's apple rolled vigorously, and the saliva secreted from his mouth was swallowed into his stomach. Then he said in an unbelievable tone, "It's Lin An. He can actually blow the moon away in the universe. How strong is he? I really don't dare to think deeply." As a demigod, Chen Daoming couldn't help shaking his head when he thought of Lin An's specific strength, and a bitter smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Although his strength has reached the level of demigods, he has become the strongest person known in the world besides Lin An. But when he faces Lin An, he still feels a sense of powerlessness from the depths of his soul, just like a two-dimensional creature facing a three-dimensional creature, and can't see the height of Lin An at all. Not to mention the fact that a punch can blow the moon away tens of millions of kilometers. The old god and the moon have merged into one. After fighting with Lin An just now, he was blown to the edge of the solar system. The huge tentacles that had originally gathered together were now completely destroyed, and a deep gully appeared on the surface of the moon. The mood of the old god had become somewhat violent, and countless tentacles appeared and waved wildly, blowing up the small celestial bodies floating around. For tens of millions of years, the old god had not suffered such a blow. The angry whispers sounded at the edge of the solar system. "Damn, new god, I didn't expect his power to be so strong. Even the Hercules of our previous era couldn't reach this level. Must kill him. His existence is the biggest threat." The next moment, the old god controlled the moon and moved again in the solar system, quickly approaching the direction where Lin An had just flown backwards. The scene of the moon being blown away was seen by people all over the world, and they all knew that it was done by Lin An. At this moment, Lin An appeared in the center of the solar system, and next to him was the sun. He stood beside the sun, feeling the intense heat. His face did not change at all, not even a drop of sweat appeared on his forehead. His purple eyes seemed to have crossed countless spaces, looking directly in front of him, in the direction of the old god's moon. A sneer slowly emerged at the corner of his mouth, and a hint of coldness flashed in his eyes. Is this the power of the old god? No more than that. After such a fight, Lin An had completely confirmed the strength of the old god. Although strong, but also limited. Lin An raised a hand and directly reached into the interior of the sun beside him. In his body, the light emitted by the will of heaven became stronger, and the power of creation in that purple eye was exerted to the extreme. Puff! Lin An, in the heavenly Dao mode, Spoke directly. Erase gravity. Erase temperature. The high temperature emitted by the sun no longer had any effect on Lin En, and the gravity that attracted the entire solar system was also completely controlled by Lin En. Lin En held up the huge and terrifying sun and moved forward towards the place in front of him that exuded an evil and cold feeling. At this moment, all creatures on the earth felt that the sun, which had always existed in daily life, began to move at a terrifying speed. Suddenly, they felt a wave of panic in their hearts. Desperate cries came from all corners of the world. It's over, the moon has changed, and even the sun is restless. The earth is going to be completely destroyed, and the sun is going to burn the earth. Lord Lin En, where are you? Please save us. But soon, photos that were magnified countless times were released on the internet. This photo was taken by the most powerful astronomical camera at present. And on this photo, the changes that have taken place in the sun are presented in detail. Next to the huge sun, it was Lin En who inserted an arm into it. Everyone who saw this photo recognized Lin En in an instant. Immediately, their eyes widened with force, as if they were about to fall out of their eye sockets. Waves of incredible light shone in their pupils, and even their breathing became much heavier at this moment. Many. What the hell? Is this Mr. Lin En? Is he grabbing the sun and flying? This is so awesome, that's the sun. The sun is like a toy in Master Lin's hands. Master Lin, he, is already invincible. Less than a minute later, Lin En and the old god arrived near the earth at the same time. The countless vertical eyes of the old god had turned into pupils. They saw Lin appearing in the distance, holding the huge fireball in his hand. Immediately, intense fear appeared in these countless pairs of pupils. The progress of the moon suddenly stopped, and the tentacles began to shake violently. A sense of death crisis that seemed to be so strong that it completely erupted in the heart of the collective of old gods. At this moment, the old god finally realized something. They will really die if this continues. A shrill wail sounded in space. How is it possible? He actually controls the sun. Why is this happening? It has only been a few minutes. It took us, to control the moon, for a long time. How he did it? The old gods really don't understand how Lin En did it. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. I can see the laws of things. Author, Xuanhuan. Chapter 276. Although the old god was very surprised by this matter, it quickly came to its senses. It hurriedly controlled the moon and quickly fled to the distance. King Ian and Banmen were sitting at home watching the live broadcast on TV. But now on TV, the live broadcast only showed a moon that was rapidly moving away from the earth. And behind this moon, there was a huge fireball chasing. King Ian raised her hand and gently covered her mouth. She watched the live broadcast on TV in disbelief. Brother, is he holding the sun chasing the moon? This is too powerful. Banmen sat next to King Ian, her eyes full of surprise. Although she had a certain understanding of Lin En's strength, the emergence of this situation now made her understand it instantly. Her understanding of Lin En's strength was just a corner of the huge iceberg. My God! Lin En can actually do such a thing. This is the sun. Although she felt stunned, she was still excited. The moon controlled by the old gods began to flee, which could only mean that they felt scared. Lin En looked at the moon that was quickly fleeing into the distance, and the coldness in his ruthless eyes became even more intense. He lifted the sun above his head and chased after the moon occupied by the old gods. The next moment, Lin En appeared above the moon, holding the sun and smashing it hard at the moon below. Boom! 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 The sun burning with flames, with a strong impact, quickly approached the moon. The countless vertical eyes of the old gods occupying the moon raised their heads at the same time and looked at the sun falling from the top of their heads. Intense panic and anxiety filled these vertical eyes. Its countless tentacles and vertical eyes, without any resistance under this high temperature, were quickly evaporated into ashes. The heart of the old god was dead silent, it could no longer escape. Because the moment Lin En held up the sun and appeared above the moon, the surrounding space had been blocked. Mistake, mistake. I didn't expect, in this era, there would be such a amazing person. He, really, is God. The old god's resentful whisper sounded in the vacuum. The so-called vacuum cannot transmit sound, which has long become a rule that does not need to be followed in front of the existence of Lin En and the old god. Lin En looked at the moon below mercilessly, and he said with a hint of regret in his tone. Farewell, ancient survivors. The original intention of the old god was good, just to make mankind a whole and survive the collapse of the world together. But this is different from Lin En's philosophy. Different paths, no plan. Boom. The next moment, a corner of the sun touched the moon. The moon was swallowed up by the sun directly. At the moment of entering the sun, the body of the old god was ignited by the flames and burned rapidly. A few seconds later, the entire moon was completely swallowed up by the sun. At this moment, the sun and the moon completely overlapped. The scene of the sun swallowing the moon was staged all over the world, and many people saw the wonder of the sun and the moon overlapping. At this moment, they opened the windows one after another, ignoring the chaos in the outside world, and stared at the sky. Mobile phones were taken out one by one, and the camera button was pressed frantically to record this wonder that had never appeared before. At the same time, there were countless exclamations. The sun actually swallowed the moon. This is simply not something that human power can do. Even God and the Creator. There is no way to drive the sun. Terrible, too terrible. At this time, those humans who were swallowed by the old god's spores and twisted stopped their movements one by one, and their bodies kept extremely weird postures, standing stiffly in place. No longer killing and twisting others. The connection between the old god spores in the twisters and the mother body has been completely cut off. They rely on the command of their superiors and lose the ability to move. The tense faces of the warriors and mages who were fighting the twisters very hard slowly returned to normal. They stopped their attacks and looked up at the huge sun in the sky. A hint of relaxation appeared in his pupils, and his face became very excited. His breathing frequency increased a lot, and white turbid gas was constantly spewed out. Great, great. Lord Lin En, he really did it? I said, as long as it's Lord Lin En, there is nothing that can't be done. Lord Lin En is really too strong. I love Lord Lin En. With Lord Lin En, our world will be more beautiful. Lin En stood next to the sun, looking at the old god who was struggling in the sun with indifferent eyes. The tentacles of the old god continued to burn, and the charred smoke filled the interior of the sun. The entire moon turned into a fireball, and the black blood covering it evaporated rapidly. The old god, realizing that he could not escape death, finally gave up resistance. It mobilized the remaining vertical eyes, merged together, formed a huge eye, and looked straight at Lin En. The eyes were full of resentment and hatred. The whisper filled with a sense of weakness began to spread in the vacuum of the universe. You are really strong. But, the collapse of the world, cannot be stopped. The only way to survive, is to transform into an old god. Even if you kill me. At the end of the era, someone will still take the initiative to transform into an old god. Even, this person, may be you. Lin En's eyes were still cold, his face was extremely calm, and he slowly said, I can definitely do it. Go stop the collapse of the world. When he thought about the day when the world would collapse and all the people he cared about would collapse and die, Lin En became more determined to stop the collapse of the world. Ha ha ha. When the old god heard Lin En's words, he just laughed crazily. It would be great if I could really do it. After the old god finished saying this, he was completely quiet, and there was no expression in his huge eyes. Boom. The moon occupied by the old god, after being burned to a certain degree, exploded unstoppably. At the same time, the body of the old god hidden in the moon also exploded into countless tiny dust. The dust spread to all parts of the universe at a speed exceeding the speed of light. Countless old god dust poured into the earth, which was closest to the destruction of the moon, and sank into the atmosphere, slowly scattering to all parts of the world. I can see the laws of things. Author, Xuanhuan. Chapter 277. And at the moment when the old gods died completely, those twisters that were standing stiffly and motionless all over the world, all fell to the ground in an instant, and the tentacles that stretched out from all parts of their bodies shrank one by one, and continued to disintegrate and dissipate under the strong sunlight. Chen Daoming's body slowly landed on the ground. He looked at the motionless twisters on the ground, and a sense of relief appeared in his pupils. After he exhaled a long breath, he raised his head and looked at the sun that was much larger than before. It seems that Lin En really killed all those old gods. It's incredible, there are actually people who can kill the old gods. That is an existence that can turn Kaidi into a slave. I'm afraid that in this world today, only Lin En can do this kind of thing. Chen Daoming has been looking at the sun, and a very complicated look has emerged in his eyes. After a few seconds, he slowly shook his head, and a bitter smile rose on the corner of his mouth. I thought that breaking through the demigod was enough. But now it seems that it is far from enough. Seeing the complete death of the twisters, the soldiers and residents all seemed to be liberated, and rushed to the streets outside frantically to breathe fresh air. Everyone's face was full of excitement and relief. They could be said to have walked next to hell. Cheers, shouts, and roars continued to sound in every city in Zhuzhou. Great! Great! The disaster is over. We didn't become monsters. All this is thanks to Lord Lin En. It was Lord Lin En who solved those monsters. Lord Lin En is so great. Long live Lord Lin En. More and more people came out of their homes. They were all cheering and shouting, Lin En's name. In addition to Zhuzhou, some other countries that were relatively friendly to Zhuzhou were also shouting Lin En's name. As for some countries that were hostile to the Zhuzhou region before, they did not celebrate like this. Standing in space, Lin En calmly looked at the sun in front of him, which had grown a little bigger. The threat of the old gods has been lifted. Then Lin En lifted the sun again, tore the space, and returned to the center of the solar system. After putting the sun in its original position and restoring gravity, Lin En tore the space again and came to the side of the earth. But when he came here, he found that the earth had undergone drastic changes at this moment. Immediately, a solemn look appeared in his eyes. Lin En looked at the earth, which was expanding at a speed visible to the naked eye, 1,000 meters, 10,000 meters, 100,000 meters. What's going on? The earth is getting bigger. But soon Lin En recalled that when the spiritual energy was revived for the first time 100 years ago, in addition to the mutation of plants and animals, the most obvious feature was that the area of the earth had expanded 100 times. This. Could it be the second spiritual energy revival? When Lin En said this, he had already determined his guess in his heart. The earth was about to reach the note of the second spiritual energy revival. If it continued to develop normally, it would not take a few months for the second spiritual energy revival to begin. At this moment, after the death of the old gods, the dust that turned into dust fell on the earth, affecting the huge spiritual energy that existed in the earth itself, and directly produced a drastic impact. The second spiritual energy revival was brought forward by several months. Lin En's face became more solemn. He clearly remembered the terrible impact of the first spiritual energy revival on the world. What kind of impact this second spiritual energy revival would have on the world is still unknown. I have to return to the earth as soon as possible. At the same time, earth-shaking changes also took place inside the earth. Various terrible disasters suddenly appeared all over the world. Tsunamis, typhoons, earthquakes, blizzards, volcanic eruptions, and other disasters. The seas around the kingdom of the rising sun were windy, the sea water was surging violently, and huge waves appeared one after another. Britain. One after another, the rare horror scenes, as if agreed, began to destroy the world. Above the Jiuzhou region, dark clouds stretching for millions of miles hovered, and drops of rain the size of fists continued to fall from the sky, continuously flooding the Jiuzhou region. Chen Daoming stood in the rain, his whole body was still soaked, and half of his legs were submerged in the rain. He felt the spiritual energy around his body, which became much richer, and a thought in his heart slowly became clear. Oops! The spiritual energy revived again. Chen Daoming's expression was extremely solemn, his brows knitted tightly, and he began to constantly command everyone to take shelter. Hurry, everyone, try to go to a higher place. Don't crowd, leave here in an orderly manner. At the same time, Chen Daoming kept raising his head and looked at the sky covered by dark clouds. He couldn't help but murmured in a low voice. Lin En, why don't you come back? In this situation, I can only rely on you. At this moment, even Chen Daoming, who was as powerful as a demigod, couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. He began to look forward to Lin En's return subconsciously. The people who were fleeing were also constantly calling out to Lin En. Master Lin En, please come back to Earth and save us. The Jiuzhou area is about to be submerged. We need you, Master Lin En. King Ian and Banmen also walked out of their homes, and the two of them came to Chen Daoming. Banmen asked Chen Daoming with a puzzled look. What happened? Why did the world suddenly become like this? Chen Daoming turned his head, his eyes a little solemn, and he answered. Something bad is going to happen. The second spiritual energy revival of the earth has begun. King Ian and Banmen were all stunned in place. They both knew very well what the spiritual energy revival meant. At the same time, in the corners of the world where few people go, 5 ancient beings woke up from their slumber. The powerful aura in their bodies exploded instantly, destroying the surrounding environment completely. But soon, they retracted the aura they emitted and disappeared quickly. Lin En, who was in outer space, was about to rush into the earth, but suddenly sensed that 5 powerful auras were transmitted on the earth. Although it only existed for a moment, Lin En still captured these auras. Immediately, a hint of coldness flashed in Lin En's eyes. It seems that another strong man from the previous era has awakened. The aura emitted by these guys is no weaker than that of the old gods. After saying that, Lin En directly tore the space and accelerated the speed of returning to the earth. I can see the laws of things. Author, Yitiao Xuanhuan. Chapter 278. A few seconds later, Lin En returned to the earth. His eyes looked towards the Jiuzhou region, which was directly below him. When he saw the sky above the Jiuzhou region, which was already covered with thick dark clouds and thunder, a solemn look appeared in those eyes full of magical aura. Sure enough, with the second spiritual energy revival, many disasters also appeared together. We have to go back quickly. At this time, countless people in the Jiuzhou region, under the command of Chen Daoming and others, fled to the heights in panic in the pouring rain. But Banmen and King Ian did not flee to the Jacehan building in a panic like other people. Instead, the two of them joined Chen Daoming and others and evacuated the refugees with him. No one forced them to stay here. This was their own choice. King Ian stood on a car that was already 2/3 submerged, being baptized by the heavy rain, pointing one hand at a building and shouting. Everyone come to this building to take shelter first, and stay calm. But King Ian still saw the fear and panic that could not be eliminated in the eyes of the crowd. Her shouting was useless. What to do? How to let them calm down? A trace of pain appeared in King Ian's pure eyes. She didn't want to see anyone die in this sudden disaster. By the way, if it was her brother who said it, they would definitely listen. The next moment, King Ian took a deep breath, then puffed up her cheeks and shouted loudly. Come on, everyone. My brother is Lin En. He will definitely come back to save us. Now everyone must stay calm and evacuate in an orderly manner. Everyone must believe in my brother. When the people who were escaping the disaster heard Lin En's name, they all looked at King Ian, who was standing on the top of the submerged car, with a firm face and no panic in his eyes. Suddenly, everyone stopped, and their restless hearts suddenly calmed down. Voices rang out in the rainstorm. I know this girl, she is indeed Lord Lin En's sister. Great. Great. We are saved. Everyone, don't panic. Lord Lin En's sister said so Lord Lin En will definitely come back to save us. That's right, what we have to do now is to cooperate with the arrangements made by Lord Lin En's sister. Looking at the crowd that suddenly quieted down and began to take refuge in an orderly manner, King Ian's eyes were filled with incredible. She didn't expect that these people just heard Lin En's name and they all returned to normal in an instant, as if the disaster was over. Brother, how important is he in these people's hearts now? They actually believe in brother so much. Brother is really amazing. Other people saw that King Ian's approach was effective, so they began to imitate it, constantly saying Lin En's name to appease the people. As Lin En's name sounded again and again in Zhuzhou, all the people who were originally feeling panic and uneasy were all at ease, waiting for Lin En's return. Ban Meng continued to use the power of space travel to rescue the people who were drowned in the rain. After she put a little girl who was only about 5 years old on the roof, she was ready to leave, but the little girl's timid voice sounded directly behind her. Sister, Lord Lin En will come to save us, right? Ban Meng squatted down and looked at the little girl's expression, which was very gentle. She said to the little girl in a calm tone. Don't worry, Lin En will definitely come. The little girl nodded heavily, and a naive smile hung on her somewhat embarrassed face. She smiled and said, I believe in Lord Lin En. He is a hero in my mind. After placing the little girl, Ban Meng turned her head and looked at King Ian in her pupils. At this time, King Ian's feet were soaked in the rain, and her body began to tremble slightly in this cold weather. Ban Meng couldn't help but feel distressed. King Ian was different from them. King Ian was just an ordinary person. It was not easy for her to persist in this situation. She used the power of space and flashed to King Ian's side. Putting her hand on King Ian's shoulder, Ban Meng immediately said, King Ian, leave here first. If you continue like this, your body will not be able to bear it. Lin En will be very worried if he knows. But King Ian shook her head stubbornly. She looked at Ban Meng and said with a firm face, No, I don't want to leave. I want to do these things I can do. Only in this way can I share some pressure for my brother. Ban Meng looked at King Ian's firm look, and for a moment he was a little choked up, not knowing what to say. And at this moment, a crack suddenly appeared in the space beside them. Lin En walked out of the space crack. He walked directly to King Ian's side, took King Ian in his arms, and hugged King Ian tightly. Although he was in the space crack just now, he still heard everything King Ian said. He immediately felt very warm in his heart. Lin En hugged King Ian, with a smile on his face, and said in a gentle tone, King Ian, you have grown up. You have worked hard during this period. King Ian's eyes became redder, and her tears could not help flowing down. She said in a happy tone, Brother, you are finally back. Ban Meng stood beside King Ian, looking at King Ian, who was hugged tightly by Lin En, and a touch of envy appeared in her pupils. As soon as she opened her mouth to say something, Lin En stretched out an arm and hugged Ban Meng into his arms. At the same time, Lin En's head moved closer to Ban Meng and said softly, "Ban Meng, you have worked hard too. You did a great job." Ban Meng's eyes became moist in an instant. She finally waited for Lin En's affirmation. She raised her arms and hugged Lin En and Qing Yin tightly. Feeling the fiery warmth on Lin En's chest, Ban Meng's little heart was filled with satisfaction. Countless people who were taking refuge now looked at the three people hugging each other tightly. Immediately, their faces showed wild joy, and they were so excited that they even clenched their fists tightly together. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. I can see the laws of things. Author, Yitiao Xuanhuan. Chapter 279. Although the heavy rain was still falling, these people seemed to no longer feel the coldness brought by the heavy rain. They stood in front of the glass, along the wall, on the roof of the car, and other places, puffed up their cheeks, and shouted loudly with all their strength in the storm. "Master Lin, you are finally back, it's great. Please, Master Lin, please save us, save the world. If it is you, you can definitely save us. In this world, only you can save us." The shouts continued to ring, and everyone was looking at Lin with a look full of hope. They believed unconditionally in their hearts that Lin could definitely save them from this dire world. Lin slowly released his hands that were tightly holding the two women. He raised his head, and his two eyes, one black and one purple, looked at the heavy dark clouds hovering above his head. King Ian and Ban Meng, along with Lin En, looked up at the sky. "Come on, brother," King Ian encouraged. Lin En just nodded gently, as a response to King Ian. Then, bright light flashed in Lin En's purple eyes, and the whole sky was reflected in his pupils. These raindrops were just ordinary raindrops. The reason why they were so violent was that the spiritual energy fluctuations were too intense, and the world was greatly affected. Lin En's face gradually became indifferent, and he said with a bit of indifference in his tone, "It's just a little rain." Then, Lin En once again said to the sky, "Stop." The next moment, the law of time began to operate. The raindrops that kept dripping into the clouds suddenly stopped, and no longer continued to drip to the ground, just quietly suspended in the air, as if the time of the whole world was suspended. Those who were shouting before now all stared with their eyes wide open, staring at the fist-sized raindrops floating around them in a daze. A man stretched out his hand and grabbed the raindrops. Snap! The moment the raindrops were passed through by his hand, they exploded into a pool and continued to float in the air. When they saw that what was happening was not an illusion, these people suddenly reacted, and then they couldn't help but say one by one, "My God, what's going on? All these raindrops stopped in the air. How is it possible, this kind of thing can actually happen? Lord Lin En is too strong," he just said 3 words. "It's worthy of being Lord Lin En, he really can do anything." At this moment, the people who escaped to the safe area breathed a sigh of relief, and the people who were running for their lives also stopped, and the rain that flooded the ground of Jiuzhu territory stopped rising. Chen Daoming, who was constantly moving in the distance, couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief when he saw that the rain had all stopped. He turned around and looked at Lin En, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of peace in his heart. After a smile appeared on his originally serious face, Chen Daoming sighed. "Since Lin En is back, then the disaster we are facing now will end. Haha." At the same time, Lin En's eyes remained indifferent, looking at the dark clouds in the sky indifferently. His lips slowly opened again. "Go back." As Lin En said this, the law of suspension instantly enveloped the entire Jiuzhu domain. The accumulated water, which was about to reach about 2 meters, was directly suspended and quickly retreated towards the dark clouds in the sky. In just a blink of an eye, the rain that flooded the Jiuzhu domain retreated to a height of thousands of meters. Those who were originally submerged by the rain also returned to the ground again. All the people in Jiuzhu are now looking up, looking at the accumulated water that keeps floating upwards with astonishment and surprise. Hiss. The sound of sucking in cold air is ringing continuously. Everyone who sees the scene is a little doubtful whether they are dreaming now. Rainwater returns to the sky from the ground. Is this a miracle? It actually violates common sense. I have lived in vain for so many years. Master Lin En, all this is definitely done by Master Lin En. Awesome, Master Lin En is really awesome. In the entire Jiuzhu area, everyone has understood at the first time that the reason for all this is because of Lin En. At this moment, their admiration for Lin En in their hearts has become so strong that it cannot be overturned. If anyone dares to say anything bad about Lin En in front of them now, a group of people will directly fight back angrily. Everyone was in joy, and Lin En slowly lowered his head and jumped off the roof of the car. He put his hands behind his back and walked towards Chen Daoming in the distance. At the same time, Lin En said lightly, "Let's go." After hearing this, the people present prepared to leave here and return to their homes to see if there was any damage. But at this moment, a cry of surprise rang out. The dark clouds have dispersed. You look at the sky quickly. Hearing this, countless people looked up at the sky, and at this time, the dark clouds in the sky were dispersing rapidly, and the sun, which was a little warmer than before, fell on the ground. It turns out that when Lord Lin En said to disperse, he didn't mean for us to disperse, but for the dark clouds in the sky to disperse. After reacting, everyone's eyes were fixed on Lin En, who was slowly walking towards Chen Daoming. Ban Meng was also looking at Lin En, and her eyes followed Lin En's footsteps and kept moving forward. Even she herself didn't realize that the look in her eyes when she looked at Lin En at this moment was full of obsession, just like a little girl who fell in love. Lin En. He is really getting stronger. I am so happy for him. King Ian looked at Ban Meng, who was not in the right state and was in a state of obsession, and asked in a puzzled tone. Ban Meng, what's wrong with you? Are you sick? Ban Meng suddenly woke up at this time, and her face turned red in an instant when she thought of her previous performance. She hurriedly said, "No. Nothing. Let's go down quickly." King Ian, who was standing aside, felt even more puzzled and curious after seeing this scene. But this time King Ian did not ask, but followed Ban Meng to walk towards Lin En. I can see the laws of things. Author, Yitiao Xianyue. Chapter 280. Duh. 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 After a while, Lin En had already walked to Chen Daoming's side. Chen Daoming was also looking at Lin En at this time. His eyes were full of satisfaction, and he felt more and more that giving the position of the ruler of Jiuzhu to Lin En was the most correct choice he had made in his life. He said with some sigh, "Lin En, this world is lucky to have you. Otherwise, this world would probably become a very scary place." Lin En just smiled at Chen Daoming lightly, and then said directly, "Chen Daoming, there is no need to say such things between you and me. I came to you because I have some news to tell you." Chen Daoming's face couldn't help but become much heavier, and he asked in a serious tone, "What news?" Lin En quickly replied, "At the moment when the earth began its second spiritual revival, I was next to the earth and felt 5 very powerful auras appearing on the earth. Each of these auras gave me a stronger feeling than the old gods." Chen Daoming's face changed drastically, and he said in astonishment, "What? How could such a thing happen?" At the same time, in the fairy spirit refuge, in a tree hole of the tree of life, an old face emerged, and she also felt the 5 powerful auras. I seem to have seen one of these auras before. Based on this crazy aura. This is definitely from an era that is older than the fairy age. After confirming her guess, the Tree of Life did not put more energy on this point. At this time, she also sensed the violent changes in the world clearly. As the Earth began to expand, the areas of various continents were also expanding rapidly, and the area of the Kyushu region was already 2/10 larger than before. The face that appeared on the tree trunk sighed slowly and said in a tired tone, "If the world continues to expand like this, then this world may have terrible earth movements, and the consequences will be unimaginable. The collapse of the world is coming, and I must be born." Boom. Boom. The next moment, this small world began to shake violently, and large areas of space began to break. Everything except the Tree of Life was rapidly annihilated. When the small world completely collapsed, the huge Tree of Life flew in the air at an extremely fast speed. The direction she was flying in was the direction where she could feel Lin En, whose aura was clearest. At this moment, Lin En was still in Jianghai City. Many people were reporting the latest news of the world to Chen Daoming in various ways. Later, Chen Daoming would tell Lin En the news. Our satellite monitoring shows that the area of each continent is rapidly expanding. According to reliable information, all countries in the world are currently facing unprecedented disasters, and these countries have sent requests for reinforcements to our country. The seas around the country of Sun Chu have set off strong winds and waves. Britain is in danger of destruction. At this time, Lin En, who had been listening to Chen Daoming's report, suddenly turned his head and looked at the sky in the distance. He felt the breath of the Tree of Life. Immediately, Lin En tore the space and stepped into the space crack. Seeing this, Chen Daoming followed closely behind Lin En. The next moment, Lin En and Chen Daoming appeared in front of the Tree of Life. Lin En asked directly, "What happened? Why did you come out of that small world?" The huge Tree of Life did not answer this question, but instead said anxiously, "Lin En, you came just in time, help me find a place to take root. I must curb the expansion of this land, otherwise the consequences are unimaginable." Lin En nodded, tore the space again, and took the Tree of Life to the center of Zhuzhu domain, on a huge plain. The moment it appeared here, the Tree of Life landed directly and took root in the earth. Countless rhizomes spread rapidly under the ground of Zhuzhu domain. The expansion of the area of Zhuzhu domain also stopped. Lin En and Chen Daoming landed in front of the Tree of Life and looked at the Tree of Life. On the Tree of Life, the old face slowly spoke. "During this second spiritual revival, I felt a familiar breath. If I'm not mistaken, this breath comes from the existence before the Fairy Age, which is called the Hell Age. The Hell Age is the era before the Fairy Age. This is an era controlled by demons from Hell." Lin En and Chen Daoming's faces became serious. The more the times move forward, the more powerful people there will be. Each of these powerful people is an unstable factor for the world. At this time, the Tree of Life continued. Now this world is undergoing the second spiritual revival, and more former powerful people will wake up from their slumber. This is an unprecedented disaster for the people of this era. To survive this disaster, we can only unite all the people of this era. Lin En did not interrupt the words of the Tree of Life. He was thinking all the time. He did not think about the ancient strongmen who would not cause direct damage to the world for the time being, but was thinking about the expansion of the earth. A few seconds later, he asked, "What will be the consequences of the expansion of the continent?" The Tree of Life immediately answered, "The expanding continents will eventually collide with each other, triggering violent earth activities. The whole world may be completely covered by the earth." Lin En's expression became more and more serious, and he asked, "Is there any way to stop the expansion of the continent?" The next second, the Tree of Life answered, "Separate them from the area where they are located, so that the earth, which has lost its main body, will stop expanding. Then you can hang them on my branches. I have a way to keep the humans on these lands alive." Lin En nodded and looked into the distance. A resolute look appeared in his eyes. "It seems that it's time to make all humans become one." Lin En had become the ruler of humans in this world after destroying several powerful countries long before. The world he ruled now faces this huge crisis. He decided to transfer all the continents with human beings to the Kyushu region before this world reached a point where it could not be saved.